Cabin Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. He's doing a drive. Deep left field. No doubt about it. Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Another edition of Cabin Sports Radio coming at you. Mike Gibbons is back in the house. How you doing, bud? And if I turn on your mic. There we are.
Good to be back.
Coming up on Cabin Sports Radio, CFL playoff preview. We're going to talk some Floyd Mayweather fight announcement. Bit of an odd one. Didn't expect that. And Melanie Thompson and Darren Horn are in the house to talk some volleyball with Volleyball NT. That and more coming up as Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
You're listening to Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Yes, Cabin Sports Radio, of course, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. And we are back for another week. Unbreakable. Mike Gibbons joins me back in the studio. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good, man. Happy to be back.
How's your trip?
Very good. A little bit of business, a little bit of pleasure.
Business?
A lot. I was there for a conference as well.
Oh, okay.
A lot more pleasure.
All right.
I will admit that.
You found yourself in Vegas.
Yes.
How was that?
Excellent. We did try to go to a Golden Knights game. That proved difficult with 6 people. We did not buy tickets ahead of time. We did not plan anything out ahead of time. We just were hoping we could run into a scalper, pick up some last-minute tickets. Such was not the case.
Didn't work out so well.
No, $100 for standing room.
$100?
Yeah, it was a hot ticket. The Anaheim Ducks were in town. Division rival.
That's a hot ticket? Wow.
Well, they're not doing great at division rival. You know, there's some people make the drive. A lot of Kessler jerseys. A lot of Perry jerseys. Yeah. No, they came out. So yeah, safe to say we did not get ourselves into the venue, which was unfortunate. But we did check out a Flames game. We watched them smash the Bruins on the Wednesday prior.
Very nice.
The Bruins did not look good. The Flames looked pretty good. But that was all she wrote. No Vegas game.
Okay. How long were you in Vegas for? We weren't quite sure. We were talking, Chrissy and Jesse joined me the last couple weeks on Cabin Sports Radio, and knew you were gone for 2 weeks, but wasn't sure what the exact itinerary was. And I knew you were going to Vegas.
Yes.
And Jesse's like, he's not going to Vegas for 2 weeks.
No,
he's not going to come back.
I don't think anyone goes to Vegas for 2 weeks.
No, I don't think so.
I would not have survived that. My bank account would not have survived that. I've spent a lot of time in the sports books. That is how I spent most of my trip, and I loved every minute of it. Football, hockey, basketball. You can bet on it. And I did.
Did you win?
3 for 5.
Nice.
Was my the Leafs let me down.
Oh, well.
Saturday night matchup against the Blues.
You can't bet with your heart.
You know what? I feel foolish because I actually bet on them on this past Saturday as well. They're 6-0 on the road now. A stat I probably should have brushed up on before I placed said bet. They went in and steamrolled Pittsburgh, which was pretty nice. Home ice, apparently not so competent. The other team that let me down was the Flames, who we saw to be quite impressive in their matchup against the Bruins. They were beaten rather handily by the Predators on that same Saturday night. So, but 3 for 5, the Raptors did me a solid, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but 60%, I'll take it.
Why can't you remember, Mike?
I don't know.
You don't have to get into it. Well, glad you had a great trip, and really glad to have you back on the show. Of course, we got a lot to talk about today. Of course, I got to talk some CFL playoff preview. The regular season ended this week. Pretty much everything was decided. I think a few standings things may have been shuffled around last second, but more or less everything was decided in week 20. So we're going to do a little breakdown of the Western semifinal and the Eastern semifinal and get us ready for those games ahead of this weekend. So the Western semifinal, let's start there. We always start in the East. Let's start in the West. That's what everyone cares about, the CFL, as opposed to the NHL or any other professional league. So the Western semifinal, my Winnipeg Blue Bombers are marching into Regina to face the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Bombers finished the season at 10-8. Saskatchewan at 12-6. Breaking it down, both teams well rested. The Bombers clinched a playoff spot in Week 20 with a win over the Calgary Stampeders. Were able to rest their starting lineup this past weekend against the Edmonton Eskimos. The Riders had a bye week in the final week, so that pretty much a wash. Mm-hmm. No one really getting the advantage there. Both teams are coming in with momentum. I think this is going to be an incredible game. Aside from the historical lore of Saskatchewan versus Winnipeg and the rivalry that comes with it, it really, when you break it down, stacks up to be a really entertaining football game. As I mentioned, both teams coming in with momentum. Both have won 5 of their last 6 games. The Bombers' last loss, of course, coming this past week, a couple days ago, against the Edmonton Eskimos.
Doesn't count.
No, they basically started their entire, their non-starting roster. Meaningless game. The Riders' last loss coming against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't close.
It was not close. A 31-0 final, October 13th versus Winnipeg. So, you can look at it one of two ways. The Riders, maybe with a bit of a taste for revenge, or perhaps the Bombers have got the psychological edge on them.
That's right. After the Rough Riders swept the home and home, the Labor Day home and home.
Yes, the Labor Day and Banjo Bowl.
Yeah, and then
don't remind me.
And then you come out with a lopsided 31-0 victory. That's got to feel pretty good. Just looking at the tail of the tape here,
mm-hmm.
it somewhat reminds me, and I love this is one of the better storylines in sports when you get a very dominant offense
right
against a very dominant D. It kind of reminds me of the 2015 Super Bowl, Denver Broncos, Seattle Seahawks. You've got the Rough Riders coming in with what you would think would be an edge on the offensive side of the ball. Saskatchewan bringing it more on the defensive side. It's a good story.
Mm-hmm. Offensively interesting story because, Matt Nichols and Zach Collaros are 2 quarterbacks who really kind of have a lot to prove still this year. They both came in bona fide starters of their teams. Matt Nichols coming off a career year last year for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and Zach Collaros brought in specifically to be the starting quarterback for the Saskatchewan Roughriders and looking to kind of reignite his career after a really, really off year last year. So they both came in with a lot to prove. Matt Nichols got injured right off the start of the season, had an awful time coming back, and even had his starting job threatened after 4 losses in a row down the stretch of the year. Really picked it up after a bye week, and like I mentioned, has led the Bombers to winning 5 of their last 6 games en route to clinching a playoff spot. A lot of clutch wins against good teams down that stretch, and capping it off with his season best performance against Calgary in the playoff clinching game for the Bombers. 358 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Zach Collaros is an interesting case because in a game last weekend against the BC Lions, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, the Saskatchewan won the game, but Collaros took a late hit, and there were some concussion concerns, and especially because he is a guy who has had concussion problems in the past. So as far as I can tell, it seems like Zach Collaros is going to start, but there's not a bright green light there. It's not, definitely he's starting. It's kind of, he's going to start, but is he 100%? That is the main question facing the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Zach Collaros. If we want to break down the offense a bit more in depth, Andrew Harris, Winnipeg Roughriders, career year in rushing yards this year with 1,390 leading the league. Saskatchewan is an interesting one because they've got an interesting 3-headed attack with Trey Mason, Cameron Marshall, and Marcus Thigpen, who in those games you mentioned, the Labor Day and Banjo Bowl games, he gave the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, or rather that attack gave the Winnipeg Blue Bombers all kinds of trouble. So they will have to adjust and figure that out. The Bombers' receiving core, probably the healthiest it's been all season, and with a week of rest, doing even better. Saskatchewan has a pretty evenly spread out passing attack. Several receivers who can make big plays if given the opportunity, led by Shaq Evans, Jordan Williams-Lambert, and Naaman Roosevelt. Basically, all Zach Collaros has to do is get the ball in those guys' hands, and they may make something happen.
Saskatchewan versus Winnipeg, probably one of the bigger rivalries in the CFL right now. Hard to believe. This will be the first time they've met in the playoffs since 2003.
We don't get this very often.
That feels like a really long time for two teams that are probably pretty used to playing against each other. Would you like me to remind you of the outcome of said game?
Yeah, go ahead.
37-21, Saskatchewan.
For the Green guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Earn that win in Winnipeg, too. That's got to sting. Unbiased. Give us your unbiased.
Unbiased. The breakdown of the offense, I'm giving the advantage to Winnipeg, mostly because I think it comes down to Mac Nichols, Zach Collaros. Nichols is at the top of his game right now, playing the best that he has all season. He's healthy. He's looking good. Zach Collaros, there is a bit of a question mark surrounding him. So break that down. Got to give a slight advantage to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. On the defensive side of the ball, Bombers middle linebacker Adam Bighill might be the CFL defensive most outstanding player. He's a guy who just makes things happen. He commands the field when he's on. You always got to be aware of him, and he can change games with his skill set. Saskatchewan's pass rush, led by Charleston Hughes and Willie Jefferson, who had 15 and 10 quarterback sacks respectively. They are going to give the Bombers all kinds of problems because the Bombers, one of their big weaknesses, despite having a pretty good offensive line, has been that pass rush. They don't seem to respond well to it unless they're absolutely prepared. So if Saskatchewan can catch them by surprise, it may be a long night for Matt Nichols in the pocket. Other than that, I would say the defensive secondary is pretty much a wash. Overall, the Bombers gave up the second fewest points against the season after the Calgary Stampeders, and Saskatchewan didn't fare too badly either. Again, maybe I'm biased, maybe giving a slight advantage to my Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But Saskatchewan does sneak back in there and makes it close simply because the game is in Saskatchewan. Mosaic Field, it is going to be loud. It is going to be hostile. And the Bombers are going to, it's going to be tough to focus. So they're going to have to find a way, but at the very least, I think it's going to be an incredibly entertaining game either way.
Winner of this, does the West still go through Calgary?
Winner, yes. Either way, Winnipeg or Saskatchewan will go on to face the Calgary Stampeders in Calgary the following weekend. So both teams, if they can get through whoever comes out of this one, both had a pretty good record against Calgary this year, and I think both finished off with wins against the Calgary Stampeders. So the West is really interesting this year, especially in the second half of the season. Saskatchewan just kind of seemed to get better as the season went on. Winnipeg had a pretty good start to the season and then had like a 4 or 5 game losing skid, looked really awful doing it as well. And then the last 6 games of the season looked like arguably the best team in the league. Calgary started off pretty much doing what the Calgary Stampeders always do, which is just win and make it look very routine and very easy. Second half of the season, though, they did something that is very un-Calgary-like and had a 3-game losing streak. So maybe a bit of psychological trauma there for the Calgary Stampeders. They also are not super healthy in their receiving corps, so that is something that is obviously going to affect them. But how much? That remains to be seen.
Clearly significantly more competitive out west, even with the last week win for Edmonton, which would have been a meaningless win. That brought them to 9-9, the same record as the BC Lions, which would have put them in second place in the East Division. So with that crossover, you've got the BC Lions sliding into effectively the third playoff spot out west, which unfortunate for them, they finished with a better record than the Hamilton Tiger Cats, but will be the road team for their East semifinal matchup.
Yes.
So all teams in the Western Conference finishing with at least 9 wins, 500. You've got the BC Lions and Edmonton Eskimos, both 500 clubs outside of the Red Blacks in the East, all sub 500 in the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Montreal Alouettes, Toronto Argonauts. So it should be a good game. We're
going to take a little break here, and when we come back, we are going to break down the Eastern Conference. Before we go, any Edmonton Eskimos fans out there have got to be a little upset that why can't every team in the West just cross over into the East. Obviously, there's not enough playoff spots to make that happen, but Hamilton finishing the season at 8-10 and hosting a playoff game. That is going to drive some people nuts. We will talk more about that and more coming up on Cabin Sports Radio.
The CSR Podcast.
Welcome back to Cabin Sports Radio. Got a couple guests in studio now. Darren Horn, the women's team coach of Volleyball NT, and Melanie Thompson, the executive director of Volleyball NT. Welcome to Cabin Sports Radio, you two.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me. Lots going on with volleyball right now. You got the Western Canada Summer Games off in the horizon, August 9th to 18th, but you have got a ton going on leading up to that. Can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, there's a lot of planning that has to go along with it. We're actually behind the 8 ball. Beginning in December 7th to 9th, we're going to be having our team selection camp. We're going to identify a group of approximately 24 athletes that we're going to continue with and do a couple of training camps between then and May, and hopefully name our team by the end of May. And then through the summer, July, and leading up to the games, we'll have some practice sessions, team building sessions, and things like that, trying to get the kids all together and hopefully all lined up and in tune for the games.
So, Melanie, you mentioned, you were talking to me a bit off the air just before we started this interview, and you mentioned you have got the registration coming up before November 15th, the registration for Canada Games, Western Canada Summer Games volleyball, correct?
Yeah, it's for the selection camp that comes up in December 7th to 9th, as Darren was talking about. They need to register before November 15th, so you'd be a part of that. Okay,
so if someone is interested in volleyball, is this kind of a just show up and let's see what you got sort of thing, or is there a very processed system leading up to this?
The camp itself is an open format, so anybody who wants to try out, meets the qualifications, they're female, they're born 2003 or later, those kind of things, is welcome to come and try out. We are looking for the best athletes that we can take, possibly. Again, we're looking at picking a training team in December. Hopefully the athletes will be going back to their home communities and working on their fitness, and they're fine-tuning their skills and playing as much volleyball at home as they can, and then getting everybody together and on the same page by the time the games roll around.
And he mentioned that there's going to be player development camps going on around the territory in different communities. What's the timeline there?
Yeah, so we're looking at, Volleyball NT is looking at putting on camps in Fort Smith just in 2 weeks, the weekend of the 16th in November, and then following that during the week in Toledo and Norman Wells, and then the weekend after that in Nunavik.
Okay, so busy schedule coming up for you two. Darren, how long have you been involved with the women's team? How long have you been the coach?
Women's volleyball is actually a new thing for me. I grew up playing volleyball myself, dabbled in coaching a little bit, and really my last go-around with coaching was 2001 Canada Games. I coached the beach volleyball team for NWT, and my knees just kind of crapped out, and I love the sport, wanted to continue with it some way, continued reffing, but again, standing up on that stand is not very comfortable with bad knees. So, and then the last Arctic Winter Games, when they came around, there was a chance to coach, and my coaching certification, the Coaching Association of Canada had changed their format, and luckily I was grandfathered in, and I didn't have to retake a lot of stuff. I just had to update a few courses, and I got into coaching and coached the men's team, silver medal at the last Arctic Winter Games in Hay River. And then when I was offered the opportunity here to coach with the Canada Games, there's a really good women's base in the Northwest Territories, and I thought it would be a good opportunity. A little bit of a challenge for me. Coaching guys is different than coaching girls, so it'd be something new for me.
Are you looking forward to the challenge? I mean, you mentioned it's an open format as far as the tryouts go, the development camps go. Do you kind of already have a sense of who you may have on the team, or are you just kind of open to surprises and seeing what happens?
Well, like I said, there's a base. There's a group of athletes with a local club in Yellowknife that had really made some good strides last year, and that group is moving up into the stage group. But again, I don't know what's happening. I'm not in tune with the girls program completely in the Northwest Territories. So I'm hoping there's some diamonds in the rough out there somewhere, and they'll come out and try out.
So the Western Canada Summer Games, again, we mentioned this August 9th to 18th in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. How are you two looking forward to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting. We have some really great coaches lined up, Darren being the women's coach, and then we have Jeannie Matheson as the men's coach. And just even our assistant coach and our managers have all been involved with volleyball for a number of years. So I think that experience and then bringing that in for our kids to be part of the whole games experience and having that knowledge base from our coaches is going to be really great.
And how many Western Canada Summer Games is this for you, Melanie?
Oh, my first one was in 2011. So, yeah, it's been a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're starting to amass quite a resume of sports in the territories.
Yeah, certainly with games.
And how do you, does the passion just continue to grow the more you come across different youth and different athletes? And is it something where it just becomes routine after a while, or do you just get more into it the more you stay with it?
For me, it grows every time. My first games experience was in 2010 at the Grand Prairie Arctic Winter Games, and that was a whole big learning curve, and then moving on to Canada Games, Western Canada Games, those pieces. But those kids really make it. The athletes, even the coaches and officials, just how much they want to learn, how much they grow just from going through those experiences. That's a big part why you stay into working with sport, being part of it. I was able to experience both as an administrator and as a coach. So, it's fun, and I can see the joy in the faces of even the coaches, the athletes, everyone that's a part of it, and it's a great atmosphere to be a part of.
You know what to expect a little bit now going into these things.
I hope so, but I can't guarantee that I will.
You mentioned also that a little bit of change going on within the volleyball community, a little bit of a rebrand, Volleyball NT. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so just recently we've changed our name. We're following along with the rest of Canada, Volleyball Canada, and so we are now Volleyball NT, so moving from NWT Volleyball Association to Volleyball NT. Yeah, so we're going to have a new logo. We're pretty excited about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some neat swag coming out, hopefully.
Yeah.
Awesome. It seems like such a little thing, but it is kind of a big thing in the grand scheme of things. A lot of organization that goes into flipping a brand like that.
For sure, yeah, it's going to be a lot of work, but in the end, I think it's going to come out really great, and hopefully everyone likes what we show them.
Okay, so lots going on within the next couple months within the volleyball community here. How can people? What's the best way to get into contact with you with regards to the evaluation camps coming up, the tryouts coming up? What is the best way to contact you?
There's a lot of information on the NWT Volleyball Association. Check that, Volleyball NT website. And it's split up by the men's program and the women's program. So it really details what we're looking at, what the plan is going ahead. And there's information on there on what the players are going to be evaluated on. They can look and see the criteria exactly what we're looking at. And there's information on there on how to register. And if they have any questions, there's contact information at the end of those pages for the coaches and the managers for each team, as well as Melanie, with the executive director.
Okay. And the website now is Volleyball NT?
No, it's still NWT Volleyball. We're not completely in that change yet. Yeah, we're still at nwtvolleyball.ca.
Okay, perfect. Mel, Darren, thank you so much for joining us today on Cabin Sports Radio.
Right on. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Continuing with our breakdown of the CFL semifinals, we did the Western semifinal with the Saskatchewan Roughriders hosting the Winnipeg Blue Bombers this weekend. Now we turn to the East with the 9-9 BC Lions walking in to face the home team, the 8-10 Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Both of whom coming in not so hot. Hamilton losing 3 in a row. Granted, when you look at the bottom half of the Eastern Conference with the Montreal Alouettes, Toronto Argonauts, defending champion Toronto Argonauts, their last 3 games were probably meaningless anyways.
Yeah.
So they do, however, come in with a 3-game losing streak. BC also entering the contest with a 2-game losing streak. Granted, that last one this past week, another meaningless game.
Probably, ultimately,
26-9 to Calgary, who leads the West. So both not very hot.
No,
coming into Sunday's contest, but who do you like out of the gate?
Well, we were talking off the air just before we get to. We were talking off the air about this is the kind of thing that gets the CFL laughed at. Quite frankly, why and how a team with a below 500 record. I mean, I guess it's understandable. You can let it slide that an 8-10 team could be in the playoffs, but an 8-10 team hosting a playoff game, it's ludicrous.
That was a story. They called it the Leastern Conference in the NBA for a while because that was a story. It was always top heavy. You'd always have the best teams of an ultra competitive Western Conference, but you would have those sub 500 teams slide into the last two, not three, but maybe two positions,
right.
But certainly not in the top 4 where you have home court advantage. But such is not the case for the 8-10 Hamilton Tiger Cats.
I know it's kind of the same case with the NBA, and I honestly can't remember the last time an Easter team actually crossed over into the West in the CFL playoffs. It's always the West crossing over into the East, and I don't know why it is that way. But regardless, here it is. BC 9-9 facing Hamilton, hosting at 8-10. Both teams ultimately have definitely underachieved this season. They're both in the playoffs, which I mean, all you got to do is get there, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the MO. It's a bit of a marathon. It's not a sprint, and that's what your coach will tell you at the start of the season. Doesn't matter how you get there. It doesn't have to be pretty. As long as you're in the dance, you have a chance to make it to the Grey Cup. So both teams have accomplished that. And that's more or less all they've accomplished of any sort of remarkability this year. Breaking it down a bit, Travis Lulay is going to start for the BC Lions, longtime veteran quarterback for the Lions, in another year in which Jonathan Jennings has failed to take the reins as the starting quarterback. The last 2-3 seasons, he's basically been handed the starting job and been like, all right, here you go. Don't make us take this away from you. And every time so far, he has made them take it away from him. And Travis Lulay has just stepped in and calmly been like, why have I not been the starting quarterback for the last 3 years? Why has there been any question? Because he's played really well every time he's stepped in. And so Travis Lulay, there was a bit of question, I think, about his health, but he will, as far as I'm seeing, will be starting for the BC Lions. So that is good news for them. Looking at the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Jeremiah Mazzoli set to start. Career year for him, over 5,200 yards passing, second in the league, 28 touchdowns and 18 interceptions. Really nice season for him, despite a few hiccups along the way, and obviously, like we mentioned, that 8-10 record, not exactly sparkling. But I don't think you can blame Jeremiah Mazzoli too much. He really stepped in, and this was a season when the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the offseason signed Johnny Football. You might remember Johnny Manziel, that guy who disappeared in Montreal, but we all still talk about him for some reason.
Yeah, that didn't pan out well.
And there was a bit of controversy because there was a bit of a quarterbacking duel there. Everyone was like, I'm not too sure who's going to get the starting job. Is it the high profile guy, or is it the guy who's put in a few years and kind of honed his craft here? Jeremiah Mazzoli stepped up right from the start of the season and basically said, nope, this is my starting job, this is my team, and never looked back. And really, down the stretch of the season, proved exactly how the Hamilton Tiger Cats made the right decision there. So both teams have players that can make plays offensively, aside from their quarterbacks. Brian Burnham of the BC Lions, fantastic receiver, arguably the best receiver in the league last year. Hamilton with Luke Tasker and Brandon Banks. All three of those players finished this season with over 1,000 yards. The thing really hurting the Hamilton Tiger Cats is their leading receiver, Brandon Banks, out for the playoffs with an injury. Broke his clavicle a few weeks back, and so he will be out. Missed the last few weeks of the season, still had over 1,400 yards receiving. Just shows you the kind of season that guy had. And no doubt he will be missed huge by the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
You mentioned that it's usually the Western Conference teams that will make the crossover. come playoff time. History, it would seem, not really on their side.
No.
Crossover teams bringing in an all-around mark, 11 wins, 23 losses when it comes time for playoff crossovers. And this, to me, it could be a toss-up. The two teams did split the season series. BC beating Hamilton 35-32 at BC Place Stadium late September. The Ticats, though, getting even with a much more convincing 40-10 victory the following week at Tim Hortons Field, and they will have home field, as we mentioned, as the 8-10 home field team come Sunday. Since the crossover was introduced in '96, amazingly, no Western Conference team that has made the crossover has emerged victorious. So it would seem that history, not really on the side of the BC Lions in this contest. 4 have gone on to make it to the East final. None have emerged victorious. So we know that the East will run through Ottawa November 18th. The winner of this game will face Ottawa in Ottawa. But it would seem, and with a 2-7 road record on the year too, for the BC Lions, they could be in tough.
Yeah. I mean, obviously playoffs, different atmosphere, different mindset. It's almost like a fresh start. It's like this is basically the first game of the season, and if we lose, the season's over. We just go home. I think, other than what we mentioned, the Brandon Banks injury, I feel like both teams are relatively healthy. Otherwise, defensively, kind of the same breakdown as the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, in that Larry Dean, fantastic season, linebacker for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, finished 3rd in tackles, tied with Adam Bighill, actually, of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who we mentioned earlier. And over to looking at the BC Lions, their pass attack, their pass rush is really what has driven the bus for them defensively this year, with Odell Willis and, mostly Odell Willis, 11 sacks on the year. The wily veteran getting it done once again. So interesting. I think, maybe a wash ultimately. Both teams have some players that can make plays in the secondary, but nothing that really jumps out at you necessarily. Overall, I think I got to give the advantage to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I like what Jeremiah Mazzoli has done this year, and I think this is an opportunity for him to make another statement, and I think he's going to do that at home.
Plus minus, usually an indicator of team success. Plus 57 on the year for the Tiger Cats, minus 50 for the Lions. Is this a legacy run for Wally Buono? We know this will be his last kick at the can.
Yeah. Big announcement. Yeah, this past week, Wally Buono.
Is this a legacy run, or is that set in stone? Is his legacy within the CFL already solidified?
I mean, his legacy is already solidified. He's been a head coach or a general manager or both for as long as I've been alive.
Head coaching since '90.
Yeah,
began with Calgary.
Without question, the greatest CFL coach in history, I think. You can make an argument for a few names. Don Matthews comes to mind. Certainly didn't have the kind of longevity that Wally Buono did, obviously for reasons beyond his control. But regardless, Wally Buono has been an absolute constant in the CFL. And that's not even mentioning his playing career. He has been a part of the CFL for as long as pretty much the majority of CFL fans have been paying attention to the game, whether it was through playing or coaching or GM later on. He has been there for 40 plus years. Wally Buono has been a constant. So it's going to be really interesting, seeing the final farewell of Wally Buono. But yeah, regardless of how this game, the semifinal, goes, and potentially any games beyond that for the BC Lions, there's no question Wally Buono's legacy is cemented, and he will be, barring some incredible effort by any future coaches, will go down as, I think, the greatest coach in CFL history.
282 career wins, a pretty solid .536 winning percentage on the road, and has had success against the Tiger Cats, compiling an overall record of 33-15. His team will try to get him a 6th Grey Cup.
So I think we got Hamilton coming out of the East to face the
Red Black?
Who are they facing? That's the one.
Yeah.
Ottawa Red Blacks. It's like Toronto Argos? No, they're not even.
Oh,
in
they
the
sucked.
Yes, to face the Ottawa Red Blacks in the Eastern Final. And I'm going with my Bombers.
Go with the Bombers.
I'm not going to lie, Mike. If the Bombers not only win this game and the next game and the Grey Cup, I might wear my Winnipeg Blue Bombers jersey for an entire year.
You're listening to Cabin Sports Radio. Miss part of the show? Download the podcast at cabinradio.ca or on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Spotify.
Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Mike, we were talking earlier in the show. Floyd Mayweather, the money team, with an interesting announcement today, announcing a New Year's Eve fight versus Tenshin Nasukawa. I think that's how that's pronounced, more or less. The interesting thing about it, so he is an undefeated kickboxer in Japan. The interesting thing about it and the confusing thing about it is that the specific rules of the fight still have yet to be determined.
Right.
A very un-Mayweather-like team thing to do.
Very. The last time we would have heard him in the news was shortly after UFC 229, when, of course, Khabib Nurmagomedov defeated Conor McGregor, because then everything that happened afterwards, including Khabib calling out Mayweather on Twitter, I want to have a fight with you, after, of course, Mayweather defeated McGregor last year. So,
yes,
we were left wondering what's next for the Mayweather team. Maybe there is another fight in the cards or something like that. 50-0 on his boxing career. So to find out today, this announcement came a little bit out of left field.
Yeah.
Against someone 21 years his junior, literally half of his age, a Japanese kickboxer. It'll be in Tokyo, reportedly, on New Year's Eve. So we did see a crossover, I guess you could say, with Conor McGregor coming, but that was sanctioned and under rules, boxing rules.
Yes.
So,
and that was very well laid out, well ahead of time before any contract was signed. It's like, it's going to be a boxing fight. None of this kicking or grappling nonsense.
And that made sense, being that it was Conor McGregor making the crossover. He's an excellent striker, probably the best in mixed martial arts. So it was kind of natural. And he would have trained for a traditional boxing match, which he did. A pretty exciting fight.
Yeah.
What did it go? 10 rounds, I believe. 10 out of 12 rounds. It was definitely 9 or 10.
It was a much better fight than I anticipated.
And it was
being,
interesting.
That's for sure.
I remember McGregor saying, and I quote, after the fight, he's not fast, he's not strong, he's composed.
Right.
And that's why he's 50-0, a perfect record over his career. So that's why, it is kind of interesting that he would put that legacy of 50 wins and 0 losses over his career on the line for a kickboxing match. But we don't know what the rules will be. Exactly.
And just very breaking from, traditional norms with the Mayweather team, where they've been they've made a legacy out of being just extremely calculated. Not only, Mayweather's fight record and, that legacy, but the fact that all of these fights have been so meticulously planned. Floyd Mayweather doesn't fight anyone unless he wants to fight them. He doesn't necessarily respond to call-outs. I mean, he will over Twitter, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But he doesn't jump at fights just because they're available. Everything is very calculated and decisions are very precise.
And I'm predicting somewhat of a quiet lead-up to this fight, a marquee fight on New Year's Eve. When you compare that to something like the lead-up to the McGregor fight, quoted as saying, I think he's young, very strong, and very fast. He's undefeated, so he's obviously doing something right. That's a lot of respect for a 20-year-old Japanese kickboxer who he's going to share the ring with, reportedly, in a couple months.
Yeah.
So it's all very strange. It's unlike something we've seen before.
Yeah. And one thing, I mean, of all the things left to wonder, which are there are more than a few, is how much money is up for grabs.
Yeah.
Because, again, the money team comes by its name honestly. They don't do anything unless there is a lot of money involved. So you kind of got to wonder what's going on exactly here. Obviously, we will hear more details as that comes out as we get closer and closer to New Year's Eve. That is not far away.
That's not. It's really not.
Lastly, Mike, we got about 5 minutes left in the show, and there was an incident in the Adult Rec Hockey League this past weekend rather. Friday night, we had a game where there was a bit of hostility. Frustrations arose and kind of came to a head at the end of the game. And without naming any names or giving too many details, there was an incident in which a referee pushed one of the players. Now, I will preface this by saying I think hockey referees take the most verbal abuse of officials in any sport.
Without question.
It's not a good thing. It's not right, but it's the way it is, and it's the way people coming up through hockey have been conditioned. It's not, like I say, I don't condone it, but it is the way things have been thus far. And I do think I give all the credit to refs that can keep their cool, because it's tough when someone's in your face yelling at you.
Absolutely.
At no point can a ref justify putting his hands on a player in an aggressive fashion. So things got a little bit silly, and the game ended with a few write-ups, as you might imagine. And so I thought, Mike, you are a player of adult rec sports. I thought you've got to have some stories. What is the silliest thing you have ever seen in adult rec sports?
Well, I was trying to think about it when we were talking about it off air, and I didn't grow up playing ice hockey. I've probably been on skates twice in my life.
You grew up respecting officials. Is what you're saying. I'm
a bad Canadian. I grew up playing road hockey, and to this day I love road hockey. We play it here sometimes when it comes summertime. So I grew up playing basketball, and I was thinking about rec sports, and oftentimes you get a little bit of testosterone in the mix. Guys get a little angry.
Naturally.
Some words are said. Some fists are thrown. I'd have to think back to my intramurals day when I was at Carleton University. Now I was definitely not good enough to be on the varsity team. They to this day still have the best men's basketball team in the country. So that was never an option. However, intramurals were always fun. And
King of the castle in intramurals,
right?
Though.
And you'd always get those guys that were like on the practice squad, or just fringe players who maybe made it through a few cuts or whatnot. So, but then you also get the people who are years removed from their prime, but they don't know that yet.
Right, the dream isn't over.
Yeah, so I'd have to say it, and people who know me, I'm the furthest thing from a dirty player. Yeah, you'll get intense every now and then, but there's a line, and you try not to cross it anyways. I would never be categorized as a dirty player. I know that, and I think people would say the same. But that doesn't mean there are people that I don't.
Not dirty, but angry.
Right. But that doesn't mean that there are people out there I don't like.
Yeah.
So I'd have to say there was a gentleman who was probably 20 years removed from his prime, 40 pounds removed from his prime, but he didn't know that, and he was a hothead. So I think it was just one of those testy, close games, and I think I knew that I was reaching more than I should have, and right. I think I came up behind him and tried to reach around him, and I must have clipped some part of his face.
I don't think the reach around is ever appropriate.
No, it's not. But
in rec sports or otherwise,
he was rubbing me the wrong way. And yeah, no, he turned around, and I think the exact quote was like, "I'll snap your arm in half if you do that again," kind of thing. Meanwhile, his young daughter, because this guy's probably in his 40s or something like that. I think he had 2 children actually on the sidelines with his wife as well, or
setting a great example.
Common law, yeah, and that's what I walked away from that experience thinking is like, really, like they're children. Think about the children.
Somebody, please.
I know in the moment people say things they probably regret, but that one kind of stuck with me because I have yet to be in a combative sport or anything like that. I've never hit anyone in sports, so I guess that one stuck with me a little bit more. Did you play another game against him, or was that it? You know what? I don't, because I would have circled that on the calendar. I don't think I did. I think that was probably the last time I saw that man in my entire life. I hope he's doing well. And everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief because nobody wanted to see any arm snaps. Well, that'll do it for another episode of Cabin Sports Radio. So good to have you back, Mike. Been good. Big thanks to Darren Horn and Melanie Thompson of Volleyball NT for joining us as well. Tune in next week. More Cabin Sports Radio and more CFL playoffs coming at you.